Okay, you've got a copy of the mark scheme on Google Classroom, and I've put a summary, like a group feedback summary on there as well. I just want to talk through some of the main bits in the mark scheme. So 9A was fine, pretty much. 9B, one physical factor that could reduce the number of visitors to the area. Again, generally fine. It must be a physical factor, it can't be a human factor. I was fairly open, so there were other reasons that you gave that were beyond what was said here, but as long as it was a physical reason that related to the number of visitors and you could explain how that might impact the number of visitors, that was okay. Remember, a physical factor is a natural factor. Part C, explain how movie location tourism is used to achieve tourism growth. You need to make sure that you are developing this answer with a logical chain of reasoning and a knock-on effect each time. So if you look here, it will say things like movie location tourism is attracting people to specific sites where filming has taken place and they want to kind of go and see that firsthand for themselves. That's one mark. Example could be Lord of the Rings in New Zealand. Some of you use Games of Thrones in Ireland. Doesn't really matter as long as it's correct. And then how does the growth come in? Well, it creates job opportunities, for example, in tour companies. So it's not enough just to say it creates revenue. It's not really enough to just say it creates jobs. You need to say where those jobs are coming from. Hotels, cafes, tour guides, tour companies. Maybe other secondary facilities that are built so that people can enjoy the experience. Similarly, or other things they would have accepted is if you said, these, Hollywood films, for example, have a global audience. So it increases essentially the sphere of influence of that particular location, and therefore you're attracting tourists from a wider pool, a wider sample, and therefore you're generating more income. There's more potential income. The adventure tourism one is very much similar. So you needed to be saying it was very much a thrill-seeking level. So examples like bungee jumping, whitewater rafting. I think some of you use that kind of extreme Mount Everest trekking type stuff. Again, it boosts the local economy. You're getting people probably into areas which are relatively remote. There's not an awful lot of alternative sources of income, so it diversifies the economy. And it means that when they do come in, they're going to hire equipment, they're going to hire guides. That's going to create revenue in those sort of stores that are hiring out their equipment. And again, that's going to generate a source of income. And then we've got here diversifying. And also it changes the demographics. So some of these areas are quite beautiful and scenic, which wouldn't necessarily appeal to a younger audience. But when you throw in the activities, then all of a sudden you're widening your the pool of tourists that you're attracting. You're widening your market share and you're attracting that younger demographic. And then with the essays, examine the extent to which economic and social factors affect personal participation in sporting activities. Most of you that did this did look at a wide range of factors. Some of you didn't. So some of you didn't cover enough of the examples. So you could have been talking about things like age, gender, stage in the life cycle, personal affluence levels, culture, religion, location, and explaining how each of those might affect the leisure and sporting activities that you take part in. If you only could weakly evidence a couple of those, then you were going to stick in the 5 to 6 bracket. If you had a range of factors and you were able to evidence and explain how they affected the participation, then you'd have been moving into 7 or 8. If you started to then kind of weigh up which ones were more important or less important, then you were going to move into that 9 or 10 bracket, as long as you had a wide enough selection of factors in the first place. So have a look through the individual comment that I gave you. And then 10B, examine ways in which the growth of tourism in rural hotspots can be managed for a sustainable future. this was very much about picking the right case study. If you picked Machu Picchu and you focused on that, which is what we'd done as our rural hotspot, and you went through the details there, you probably scored quite well. If you were talking about Footsteps Lodge, or if you were talking about another eco resort like Brian's Resort, the Maycock River Resort, it wasn't going to work because they are not hotspots. A hotspot, by definition, is an area that receives, a huge number of tourists where it's potentially exceeding its carrying capacity on a regular basis. Those are the examples we've used for ecotourism purposes, which is a very, very different type of tourism. So your answer kind of self-penalised itself. But if you were looking at Machu Picchu, there was lots to talk about in terms of social impacts that needed to be managed, environmental impacts that needed to be managed, economic impacts that needed to be managed. Maybe not so much political, but you could definitely use those first three aspects of SEEP. And the people that did that and structured their answers around SEEP generally scored really well. Check your PEA. For most of you, the PEA in both essays is really good. What's missing is the link back to the title at the end of each paragraph. And so for some of you, that is definitely something you need to focus on. Again, similarly, if it was quite weakly evidence, so some of you used Machu Picchu, but there was no real detail in there. There weren't the names of the trails, there weren't the data on numbers of tourists or amount of kilograms that porters were allowed to carry. That kind of level of detail needs to be in there. If it was well evidenced and you had a range of different management strategies, so it wasn't an essay about the problems or the impacts, it was an essay about how that's being managed. If you had a range of management strategies that had evidence, you were going to get 7 or 8. Again, a discursive conclusion, some sort of evaluation, some sort of sense of perspectives has to come in to get the 9 or the 10. So which aspects are easier to manage? Are the social ones easier? Are the environmental ones more challenging? If so, why? Is there a conflict there between the need for economic growth and the need for us to protect the environment and those primary resources that are there in the first place? There needs to be that sense of discussion coming in, either in the essay or certainly into your conclusion, to get 9 or 10 marks. And please don't bring anything new into the conclusion that you haven't really talked about earlier on. The other good thing to consider with this essay, and often this is a good one for all the essays, is thinking about the concept of time. And will things stay the same over time? Do you see the pressures becoming greater on somewhere like Machu Picchu over time? Do you see them lessening? Do you see the management strategies that are working now needing to be revisited and adjusted in the future? So think about that, because one of our key concepts is possibility. So what are the possible outcomes as we move forward in time as well?